And welcome back to Love Your Food. This week we're doing a recipe based on the Blitz puff pastry that we did last week. So this week we are doing these cheese straws. It's a really simple recipe, really delicious, great for parties, and very easy to make at home. All you really need is the puff pastry, and you can use store-bought for this if you like, but here's our ingredients. So we're starting with our puff pastry. We have an egg for an egg wash with some mustard. And we're going to be using some cheese. So we've got a couple of different ones. We've got a hard cheese that's a Beamster, and this is actually a truffle Monterey Jack that we found at a shop. It's really delicious, and we're going to be using that for the other cheese. So first of all, we need to roll out our puff. So we're going to get a board nice and ready. We're going to get some flour on there. Always make sure all of your surfaces are well floured when you're handling your puff pastry so that it doesn't stick when you're rolling it out. You don't want it to stick to your board. Now, we stored this in the fridge, and we kept it in saran wrap, just folded over and wrapped with the layers of plastic wrap between the layers of puff. Now, we're only going to be using half of this today, but we do want to get rid of this sort of bulge in the middle, so we're just going to roll that out real quick. There we go. Just make sure it's all nice and even. We don't need to get it to our intended thickness just yet. And then we're just going to cut that in half. And we're only going to be using half of this today. The rest we're going to be using for future recipes. And then make sure that you keep that other half wrapped up. Again, we're just going to wrap that up in some plastic wrap. And try and keep the plastic wrap between the sheet. So that it won't touch itself. Otherwise, you might end up with all of the puff pastry sticking to itself, and that makes it really difficult to work with later. So we're just going to wrap that up, and that will go back into the fridge or freezer. This freezes just fine, so you can pop that in the freezer as well, and then just let it get up to room temperature before you start handling it. So we're left with this nice rectangle. So we want to try and keep this as even as possible. We want to keep the rectangular shape for a couple of reasons. Mostly because we're going to be cutting this in half and covering one half with the other. So we want it to be as even as it can be, so that makes that part much easier. So here we go. We've got it rolled out pretty well. Now any little flecks, we've got a couple of little... I think the little flecks of pepper, honestly, they will show up in your puff pastry if they get stuck in there. So try and keep your work surfaces really clean. So we're just going to cut that in half. You want to get it as close to the middle as you can again. And we're ready to start working on our filling. So we're going to start off with an egg and a pretty decent sized dollop of mustard in there. Now we're using this beautiful market mustard from Kozlik's, which is a local mustard to us. But honestly, anything that's fairly grainy, still has some grains in it, will work really well for this, and will hold a good emulsion with the egg when you beat it together. So we're just going to give this a good mix until it is all well combined. So once you've got that emulsion done and everything's well combined, we're just going to just spread that. We're going to brush that onto the bottom layer of our puff pastry. And we want this to go all the way to the edge. So we're just going to make sure that we cover the whole thing. And don't be afraid to be generous, because this has a lot of flavor in it. We're using this really lovely mustard that's got lots of lovely flavor. Don't skimp out on the mustard and egg wash at this point. You want to really bump up that flavor. So the rest of the filling is going to be the softer of the cheeses. So this is the Monterey Jack with truffles in it that we found. Now you can use whatever you like for this, anything that's pretty decent melting cheese, and we're just going to really finely grate that for the inside of our cheese straws. And again, this is going to go all the way to the edges. We want to make sure that there are no big obvious gaps or anything. So just spread it around. Make sure you don't have any big gaps in there. Try and cover up any big wet patches or anything. And then you want to cover it with the other half that we cut off earlier. And you can see we did get pretty close. Now, the nice thing about this puff is that it does stretch quite a lot. It's got a lot of gluten formed in it, so it's very stretchy. So just make sure it covers the bottom part pretty much exactly. So now we're going to give another layer of our egg wash with mustard. And again, don't be afraid to be a little generous and really double down on that flavor in there. And then on top of that is going to go our hard cheese. So anything that you would normally use for a Parmesan for would work just fine here. So if you have some nice Parmesan that you can grate on there. We're using this very dry Beemster. It's a Dutch Gouda that's been aged quite a lot. So this is Beemster XO. And it's got a lot of flavor. It's very, very interesting aromas and everything. And really, really delicious. And will make a great cheese on top. We're just going to give a little sprinkle of fresh cracked black pepper on there as well. So there you can see we've got it all the way to the edges once again. And we're just going to give that a little tap down to make sure everything's well coated and it's all pressed, all in good contact with that egg wash beneath, so it'll hold together really well. Now, once again, you want to try and make sure there aren't any big obvious gaps in the cheese or any wet spots or anything, because the next thing we need to do is roll this until it's a little bit thinner. So we're going to cover this with some wax paper or parchment paper, because we don't want to, you can do this without the wax or parchment paper, but your rolling pin will get dirty. It'll get cheese stuck to it for sure. And we just want to roll this out for a little while. We just want to roll it out until it's a little thinner. Everything's pressed together. You get a little bit better of the layers in there. And there we go. That's about as far as we want to go with this. Now you'll see the bottom of the puff is kind of attached to the parchment paper, and as it's contracting a little, it's pulling the parchment with it. But that's just fine. So this is ready to go. So this is about as thin as we want it to get, and we're going to cut this into very thin little strips. You want to try and get these as even as you can, but whatever thickness you're happy with, remember we're not done working with it yet, so leave yourself a little bit of space, because we are going to pull these a little wider, a little longer, and then give them a twist. So we're going to pop these onto a baking sheet. And there we go. So that's about what we're looking for. Just a few twists for the length of the cheese straw. And you want your good non-stick surface on there. So if you have something like a silpat, then that's ideal. But you can also use parchment for this as well. And there you go. So just give them a little twist and pop them onto that non-stick surface. And they are ready to go. So we're just going to pop those into our preheated oven. And you do want to keep an eye on them. It is puff pastry. They're pretty thin. So take a look if you feel like they need a little bit more time. Now remember, they will darken a little bit as they cool, as they come back up to as they come back down to room temperature. But these ones are pretty much done. So they've got that nice crispy edge. They're not super golden, but they've got a little golden edge around the whole thing, and that beautiful hard cheese on the outside. As it cools, it's going to get nice and crispy, and this is what it ends up with. So they are really irresistible. You can serve these however you like. We like to put them out in a glass. Just take one and have a dipping sauce to go with them, and that's it. That's the whole thing. Really, really easy. A very delicious, great party food, and we hope that you'll give this one a try. So if you like this recipe, please do like and subscribe. And if you have any recipes you'd like to see Chef Caleb try on the channel, please let us know in the comments below. And remember to love your food.